In this video, I want to go a little bit further with smart objects and show you how to work with smart objects when you're working with transformations. You may recall earlier in the semester that I mentioned that transformations are particularly destructive operations. They rearrange, delete pixels, and so once you hit that transform button, there's no going back unless you start over again with a new layer. But with smart objects, that's not an issue. Smart objects will protect that original layer so you can keep on going back and retransforming. Let me show you, first of all, a little bit about how that works, both with smart objects and without smart objects, and why the smart objects are such an advantage. Now, I've got this sort of sketchy start of a composite image set up. It's got a background of these branches and autumn leaves, and then I have two copies of this black Phoebe that I've masked out. So it was sitting on this post, and I masked him out, just sort of a beginning mask to get started, just for the demonstration. And what I want to do is I want to transform both of these to show you the big advantage of the smart object. But first of all, I'm going to transform one of them into a smart object, or convert one to a smart object, so we could see the difference, and also so you can see a little bit more about how smart objects work. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and transform this one into a smart object. Now remember, a smart object and a smart filter, pretty much exactly the same thing. We convert a layer to a smart object so we can apply a smart filter. So there really isn't any difference between these two things. Okay, so I've converted this layer into a smart object. And one thing you might notice right away, I had a mask on this layer, and now the mask appears to be gone. And that might be a little worrisome because the mask that I've applied is not particularly good. It really needs some refinement. So you're thinking, well, that's really dumb. As soon as you're converted to a smart object, it looks like it's just been cut out and we can't do anything. Well, this is a great way to learn about how smart objects operate. Since the mask was on the layer when I converted it, it became part of the smart object. So if I click here, it's going to take me into the smart object, and there's the layer. And one of the things to realize about this is that a smart object really is a separate file that's embedded within or nested within the original file. So now that I'm on the smart object, there's the mask, and I can refine it just as I would any other mask. I can go into select and mask, and I can go ahead and hit the smart radius. I'll take it up to 2 pixels. That helps right away. I'm not going to do all of it, but of course you can see there's a lot of improvements that can be made here. I could go into my refine edge tool and just work with the edges here. Yeah, see if I can improve some of this. Bring up more of the details of this image, the feathers, and make a lot of improvements. Take out some of that background contamination noise, just as we have before, just refining the selection. Because it's on a smart object, it is on this second layer, or it's in this other image, but it doesn't mean that we don't have the option, especially down here, to refine this. Bring up some of these edges of these feathers. I want to leave the feet be, and I think you'll see why. I want to have them, even though they may not be perfect, I think I'm going to leave them so that they're nice and substantial. Come up here. Make sure the beak is good. Now, I'm doing this rather quickly. I'm going to miss a little bit. I'm not going to get this absolutely perfect. But it'll set us up for the next part of our demo, just so that we have that rather nice. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and okay that. Not perfect, but not bad. Remember, you can also come in if you needed to You could come in with a brush tool to refine any areas that don't look quite right when you get done there. Okay, so once we get done with that, we're still on this this image. I'm going to leave that be for now, just for the sake of this. We hit save, and it saves this layer. This is what's kind of deceptive. So we are actually on this other image layer, or I should say this separate image. Just close that, we come back, and you can see that we have just refined that mask. I'm going to go ahead and leave this other mask unrefined because I'm going to delete that layer after I show you the next part. So I want to go ahead and transform both of these just to demonstrate one of the huge advantages of the Smart Object. So I've selected both of them. I'm going to do Command T to bring up my transformation menu. And for the sake of the demonstration, I'm going to pretend that I want both of these birds very, very, very tiny. We're going to make them super, super tiny. So tiny that they can sit on these little berries. Okay, maybe even a little bit tinier. And we're going to turn them a little bit too. Just turn them around. And go ahead and hit that transform. Now, even though I transformed them together, they are still separate layers. And I can just move one here, and I'll move one over there. Now let's keep track. This is the Smart Object. This is the non-Smart Object. So now that I've done, I'll come back here and say, well, that's okay, except what I really want to do is have one little tiny bird and one giant bird with his head poking out here. Now, in order to demonstrate why this, the difference between these two, I'll go ahead and start by retransforming the non-Smart Object. And I'm going to make him really, really, really big just to exaggerate. Oh, and there you see it. Oh my goodness, I get so big. Let's get a little bit bigger just so we can really see what's going on. And you notice that all of a sudden we're starting to see a lot of pixelation. And that's because so many of the pixels have been thrown out that the resolution is gone. Let me go ahead and hit return. And it looks like, well, it's not too bad. It sort of interpolated it and made it better. So maybe we're in luck. But let's just see what happens instead if we go ahead and retransform the Smart Object. I'm going to go ahead and make him just as big as the other one so we can see the comparison. And you can see that the Smart Object has not lost any resolution at all. We'll zoom in so you can see the difference. This looks great. This looks terrible. Okay, so that is the big advantage of the using Smart Objects for transformations is you can change your mind and you can go back. Really, if you make something very, very tiny or you distort it, if you go back, you will have lost all of that information. Okay, so now I want to show you another tool, and another tool that benefits from being used with a Smart Object or as a Smart Object. I'm going to go ahead and take our non-Smart Object out because we don't need it anymore. Okay, there we go. And we got our nice big bird at this point. I'm actually going to make him a little bit smaller. And we'll straighten him out. Not too much smaller. And so for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to pretend, I want to bring him over here, that I want him to sit on this branch. So I'm just going to put him right there. Looks fabulous, right? Yeah, not so much. So this is a great thing that commonly happens with composites. He is sitting on the branch, but he's clearly not really on the branch. So I've gone ahead and eliminated the non-Smart Object layer here. And I have changed the file size, cleaned up the masking a little bit, and I want to show you the Puppet Warp tool with this Black Phoebe. Puppet Warp tool is right over here in the Edit menu. You do need to be on a subject that the Puppet Warp tool can grab. It's best used, and I'll go ahead and put the mesh on it so you can see where it's going to apply. It's best used for animals, humans, those kinds of subjects. Doesn't work particularly well on buildings. There's other tools for that. So it just wraps this mesh around, and you can pick points. It looks a little bit like a regular warp tool, but it operates a little bit differently. You're going to pick points along this area, and you try to pick points that are really at the joints primarily. So if I pick a couple of points here, I'm just going to sort of grab these so that they lock things down. And then as I move these, you'll see that it allows this bird to move around on these joints. This is pretty cool. Now, what I want to use this for, I'm going to go ahead and take the mesh off. So what I want to use this for is to change the position and the expression of the Phoebe a little bit. That's always good. And you can see that you can get kind of warping, but everything responds to the other pins. So you have to kind of keep an eye on everything as you work. So I can change the expression, but what I really want to do is I want to make this Phoebe look a little bit more like he's actually on the branch, because you notice as when we started, he just feels like he's sort of plopped there. Now I also want you to notice that as I get started on the Puppet Warp, it shows up here as a filter, as a smart filter. And I'm going to show you one other cool smart filter that we can add here. So the Puppet Warp is showing up as a filter and not as a transformation. So what I really want to do is I want to get these feet to feel like they're sitting a little bit more on the branch. And I can do that by just grabbing them. Even though the mesh is not showing, the mesh is active. And you might prefer to work with the mesh on. More and more, I like to work with this very, very squirrely tool with the mesh off, so that I can actually see what's going on. And because you can see that as you start to move these joints, it's always a little bit of a surprise. You're never sure what else is sort of responding. I've gotten to work on one area and looked up and found that it really completely changed another area. So the more of these little points you can give, the more control you have, but the less of the sort of larger body work that you're going to do. And oftentimes you're just going to have to grab something and sort of move it out of the way, move it into place. And I'm trying to move this joint. This is very small, but I don't want to mess up anything else. I want to just move that claw so that it's around there. Now, any of those are just not working. That is, if they're, oh, it looks like I needed to have one right on the tip. There we go. But if any of them are not working, you can just take them out. There we go. And you could keep adding them so that you could keep warping. Ah, there we go. Now, once you get to a point where you feel like you're done, you can go ahead and just check it by hitting the transform, but keeping in mind that if things are not right, like I can see, this little claw should not be there, this is a little weird, you can just click back on Puppet Warp and you are back. And you're back exactly where you began because you are working with the smart object. Okay, whew, let's see. Let's do just a couple more. I think I want to show you just this rotation tool, which can be really cool, little squirrely. There we go. So this, you could just rotate. I'm just going to bring his tail up slightly, pull him in there, and he is looking pretty good. I'll show it to you with him off. That's how he started, and this is with him on. definitely feels more like he's sitting on the branch. Now I'm doing this really quick. A lot more could be improved. I want to add one other thing, and that is a drop shadow. Now this is the filter effects. In order to go to the drop shadow, it's the same way you would do it before. Down here, you can add it in that area. But notice that as we add it on, it goes in as a smart filter. I've already tweaked some of this, but let me just show you. I created a sort of a dark gray blue color for that drop shadow, changed the angle, made sure it was below him, and I'm mostly trying, even though this drop shadow is going to show up everywhere, I'm trying to angle it so that we mostly just see it under his feet, because that's where we need it. And the distance should be fairly tight. We just want it under there. The spread can be relatively loose, but the size should be fairly large, so we just get a little hint of that shadow. Click OK, and there we go. Yeah, he's looking a little surreal. There's definitely some cleanup that could happen here, but you can see from, oops, let me take them both off. We go from here, puppet warp, drop shadow. And I can keep on coming back in and cleaning that up and changing it and playing with it until it looks the way I want it to be. Okay, that should give you some new ideas about how you can play with your smart objects and your filters. Have fun.